reading this week is in Judges chapter 4. If you want to get your Bible and head over there, we're going to talk a little bit about this one, Judges chapter 4. In fact, 4 and 5 kind of go together.
Yeah, they do.
And so probably for
Kind of like Exodus 14 and 15.
for the next couple of weeks, it would be good probably just to read 4 and 5 as a unit and spend a little extra time here since, 4 is sort of what happens, and then 5 is this celebratory song and the aftermath of it. And so it's really, it's okay, so it's one of the things you see in Judges, and we talked about this at the beginning, that you have some judges like Shamgar just before this who hardly gets, 2 sentences, right?
Right.
And then Deborah's story gets 2 chapters.
Right.
So lengthy.
Well, a song that interprets it too. I mean, that's part of what happens, right?
Yeah.
It's really chapter 4 is the account. Chapter 5 is the poetic song interpretation of what happened.
Now, this is a typical judge cycle story, right?
Oh, in terms of sin, oppression,
sin and the enemy. This time Sisera and his crew
happening in the north, by the way, happening up around Hatzor and Megiddo and Jezreel and all that up there. So a northern story this time.
No, okay, and so it's that same kind of process, but with each of these stories where you have the story expanded and given some length to it. There's an agenda at work there. There's something going on. There's some point being made.
That's right.
Which is why we're getting an extended version of the story.
Right.
And unfortunately, Jeff and I are going to blow up today sort of the traditional understanding of Judges 4 because I think typically when we read this story, what we focus on is Deborah and Jael, who actually I think is the funner one in the story.
Well, the tent peg, man, that's legend. Stuff of legends right there. Literal.
Such a great story. But I think the typical view of that is to look at these stories as stories designed to celebrate women in the Bible. And to be sure, I think both of the women in the story are good.
Oh, absolutely. Deborah that's why God raised her up. I mean, because of the quality of her character and her faith. I mean, absolutely.
But I think in celebrating that only, we're missing the more important issue that's lying
Well,
here.
it's reading the story carefully, not just saying, here's what I want to see in it from modern culture, reading the story carefully.
Yeah, so if you go back and you look at the story, it is not Deborah who's supposed to be the point person leading the armies to push back on the enemy. Barak is being drafted. I'm adopting the Jeff pronunciation there.
Sorry about that.
Those who are used to Barak.
Sorry about that.
He is the one that's called through Deborah by God to be the leader, but he won't go.
Right, correct.
And so one of the things that the story is really trying to emphasize as it tells the story of cultural collapse is the failure of the men.
Yeah, the whole issue is that the men have failed, which is why you have, it seems to be, if you read between the lines, the raising of Deborah as a prophetess. Same thing you see in the days of Josiah when Huldah's the prophetess. The whole point is they've lost the book of the law. They just found it. They just read the Josiah. What do we do? When you see, what's missed sometimes is this is not normative. The whole idea is it's that bad that all God can do is find a faithful woman. And the faithful woman is trying to motivate the man to go do the job that he's supposed to do. And when he still hesitates over going and doing his, and literally being called by God through Deborah to go be the man and do the job.
That was how God wanted it.
That's what God wanted. And he still hesitates if she won't go with him. Then she, in verse 9, flat out says, this is the issue. The Lord will sell Sisera in the hand of a woman. If you literally won't be a man, God will give the glory to the woman instead of to the man like he wanted to do when he tells you, Barak calls you to go do this.
And so the important thing underneath that, I think, is the assumption that the man was supposed to step up and be the leader here.
And it failed to do so.
And he fails to do it. And so the consequence of that is I'm going to give the glory.
We meet Jael in a tent peg.
Yes, that is exactly right. And so as is the pattern in the Old Testament story, it is the men who lead the armies and fight the battles and do exactly what Deborah and Jael are doing in this story. And so it's sort of breaking that consistent pattern all the way through the Bible story. And we're sort of left to wonder why. And I think the answer is because the book of Judges is telling the story of a society that's declining and collapsing.
Right, and so badly broken, and that's the thing too. Sometimes the mistake people make is they say, "Well, there's the Deborahs and the Huldas," and certainly great women of faith, and God was able to use them because of men's failures. But it's interesting in the Old Testament, you never see a female priest. The woman never gets the priesthood. And if you think about how the law actually set things up, the priest was to be the constant normative, your regular position. Prophets would be raised up as God would. It wasn't meant to be a normal position passed on from father to son or what have you. The priest was, you go back, you're like Leviticus chapter 10, all the way to Malachi chapter 2, the priest teaches the law. And so if the priest teaches the law, the male priest teaches the law, and the people obey the law, there's actually no need for a prophet, because what do prophets chiefly do? And kind of like even Deborah here, coming back and saying, guys, get back to doing what you're supposed to be doing. Obey the law. In this case, Barak, step up and be the man. But the prophet shows up to say you haven't kept the law, or maybe the priest hasn't been teaching the law. But if the priest teaches the law and the people obey the law, you don't need a prophet in the Old Testament until you have the prophet like unto Moses, somebody brings the new covenant. But you don't need a prophet calling you back to this old covenant if you do it. And so that's the thing, is it's interesting in the Old Testament, you never see a female priest. As that was meant to be the one constant, in the Old Testament. And eventually kings, but you only see, those couple of queens, Athaliah, daughter, of Ahab and Jezebel, and then, Jezebel herself. I mean, it's always a mark of men have failed, sin is rampant, the kingdom has collapsed, in its generation. And so that's the thing. It's there is actually a pattern there to pick up on that's easily missed sometimes about what God wants versus the abuses of passion like this. Again, not to shortchange great women of faith in any way, shape, or form. But and I think great women of faith, Deborah wants Barak to be the man he's supposed to be, and
Correct.
that's the idea.
Yeah, and I think that's the clarification you made there is important. That doesn't take anything away
Never, no, not at
from
all.
Deborah or Jael,
Not at all.
as being good women. It might be interesting to be married to Jael. Sleep with one eye
What
open.
did you do today, honey?
Yeah. That was an interesting conversation. But there is an order.
Yeah.
A God divine order. Careful now, I'm going to use the G word, that goes all the way back to Genesis.
Yeah.
As God has set up
Right.
cultures, families, and marriages. And anytime we break with the divine order that's consistent throughout the Bible story, then there are consequences. And so I only point that out, again, as you said, not to diminish anything about what a good person Deborah is and Jael is.
No.
But so that we don't miss the point of the story.
Right.
Because in reality, then you start wondering, okay, well, why is this story here?
Right.
And I think the reason this story here is the fact that the men are not stepping up like they need to, and the women get the glory, and they're the hero in the story,
Right.
because they're doing the job the man should have done.
That's right.
That's not celebrated.
No.
That's a condemnation of the men and their failure,
That's
which
right.
I think is really the point here.
Yeah, that's right. Again, the book of Judges is meant to explain, especially when we get to the end of the book, in that day there was no king in Israel. Everyone does what's right in his own eyes. It's meant to underscore all these different ways and repetitious cycles of how Israel falls. And it's not just a cycle, it's really a downward spiral like we talked about a couple weeks ago. And what are the things that go into a decaying society, and of course we could apply to a decaying congregation. What kinds of things lead to not just sin, but a downward spiral into deep brokenness that God eventually has to judge catastrophically.
Right.
And these are the kinds of things, stories we talked about, last week, stories we'll talk about yet to come with Gideon and with Samson, all these, Jephthah, all these others. But this is one piece of, not the only one. Don't want to beat this too much, but this is an important piece, especially in our time, to notice
God chose to preserve it.
of what goes wrong. There'll be other ways it goes wrong too, but certainly we want to, as people who want to stand against the world of our own time, be aware.
I think that a more careful reading with that in mind,
Yeah.
I think it becomes clear that actually is the point the text is trying to make.
Yeah.
And so I'd encourage you to do that in your reading of this, thinking about it from that angle. Here's the other great thing. Since we're kind of doing 4 and 5 together, and we're going to work on 5 next week, it's a great opportunity for you to ask questions. So you might want to ask some questions for some clarification on that, or even if you want to push back a little bit and have us go deeper, we are happy to do that. Just shoot us a text. give us a question, and we'll be glad to work on that. But for now, why not take some time to work through 4 and 5 with your family this week?